Well, a quick comment on also what was announced today. India's GDP for the July to September quarter, and it's contracted 7.5% for the second quarter of this financial year. Remember, for April to June, we saw a contraction of nearly 24%. It's now contracted 7.5%. Technically, it's a recession now. That's what experts are saying. But it's not the kind of free fall that we saw in the first 3 months. But that's obvious as well, because in the month of April and May, almost everything had shut down. There was no economic activity in our country because of the lockdown. So anything is going to look better than that. Chief Economic Advisor K. Subramanian says that Indian economy had picked up momentum in February, only to be halted by the COVID-19 outbreak. So as I say good evening to Mr. Santosh Mehrotra, let me ask him this question, if he agrees that we were picking up before the COVID hit us. At that point, things were beginning to look very good. And now we are back to rock bottom and beyond, Mr. Santosh Mehrotra.
We were picking up. I'm a bit surprised by that, Tanvi, because actually for 9 quarters prior to pandemic hitting us,
correct,
there was a decline in the economy, a decline in the growth rate of the economy for 9 quarters. And in January to March, the growth rate of the economy was 3.1%,
yeah,
which was an all-time low. And it was under those conditions that the pandemic hit, and then we discovered that we had the worst economic crisis in decades. In fact, the worst of all G20 countries, because there was no country which contracted by 24%, not one. The world contracted much less, and the Europeans and the G20s all contracted by much less. And that's precisely the experience in quarter 2 as well. So yes, the contraction is lower than in the period of the lockdown in quarter 2, because quarter 2 was a period of unlock. However, among Japan, Italy, France, Germany, USA, we are still the worst. Only UK is worse than us in this quarter. The contraction is less in the others. And we have to ask ourselves, Tanvi, why it is the case that we are performing worse than our possible sort of peers. And the reason for that is, I'm sorry to say, the poor nature of the fiscal stimulus, the poor nature of the overall stimulus. Point 1. And the second reason is the nature of the lockdown. There were 4 problems with the lockdown. The first problem was that we imposed it too early. We had 692 cases on March the 24th of COVID. How many cases do we have now? 9.2 million. Secondly, in other words, we could have waited a little.
Right.
Secondly, it was very sudden, at 4 hours' notice. And because it was at 4 hours' notice, it was unplanned. Had we delayed it and not made it so sudden, we could have planned for bringing in all the ventilators, the PPEs, the masks and everything. It could have been properly planned. Thirdly, unlike China, we put in place a national lockdown. China put in place a lockdown only in Hubei province, where the problem began. In Wuhan city, they didn't eliminate all flights and all trains all across the whole country. They only eliminated and cancelled trains and flights from Wuhan to the rest of the country. And finally, it was the most stringent lockdown. Why should it have been? In the world, no country had as stringent a lockdown as ours. We are paying the price of that. We need not have contracted. And this is very serious for our people, because we have the largest number of poor people of any country in the world.
Absolutely.
And certainly for G20 countries. And people are being driven into poverty because of joblessness. So
I just want to,
really
Professor Mehrotra, Just if I can ask you a quick follow-up question, there are a
Please.
lot of other data indicators that have also emerged, including the core output, that came out today. Does it look like from here on things can get better, or are we going to be stagnated at this level?
No, it is obviously going to get better. We are hopeful that demand will slowly revive almost automatically, not particularly because of any of the actions that have been put in place, because
Yes.
most economists are convinced that the fiscal package, even today after Atmanirbhar Bharat 3 of 2 weeks ago, the fiscal package is only just 2% of GDP.
Correct.
Compare that to 2008 global economic crisis. When that hit, we put in place a fiscal stimulus of 3.5% of GDP, and the economy revived to 6% growth within 2 quarters. What have we got after the pandemic? We've got a technical recession, which is particularly sad for a country which has hundreds of millions of poor people.
Yes, and that's where they are the ones who will have to who will end up bearing the brunt of it. Professor Mehrotra, we had very less time today because it's another big issue that's of course got the nation's attention, and the farmers of our country must be spoken about as well. But I'm sure in the coming days we will have a more detailed conversation on the state of economy, including the farm sector numbers that have come out today. But thank you so much for speaking to us here tonight. There you go, viewers. You've heard from the expert what to make of this data. We're all hoping for a recovery, but keep this in mind. Anything would have looked much better than a contraction of 24% when the country was in a complete lockdown. But what we have to see is for how long now will we see the pain in the economy for that, because of that lockdown, and because we were already in a phase of a massive slowdown. The jobs that have been lost, the businesses that have been shut, the people who are struggling today, the costs that have already been cut, and those companies are not going to bring back or add to those costs anytime soon. So when will we be out of the woods is the big question. And we end this financial year on a more optimistic note. The government definitely believes so. I would say let's wait another 3 months of data to show us which way we are headed and how quickly are we actually getting out of the woods. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.